Hey, got you dancing there, Mike.
Yeah. Welcome back, kids. It's been a while, but we're back. And the last time I heard that, it was in Poltergeist. I think we're back or they're back. Hey, good to have another episode of Azure Unsung Heroes or Unsung Heroes of the Cloud, as we could like to call it. Nice seeing you again, Matt.
Good
How's
to see
life?
you, Mike. And Brian, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for
Hey,
having me.
Brian.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
You're
It's good to be
welcome.
here.
You're welcome. Where are you from, Matt? Brian, sorry. I know where you're from.
I'm not from where Matt's from. I'm based out of Salt Lake City, Utah.
Yeah. All right. So, Brian, you're actually you're a peer of mine, but on the customer side, you're also a cloud solution architect, aren't you?
Yeah. I focus in the app innovation space, so really software engineering, utilizing a lot of the PaaS services within the cloud of Azure, and helping customers modernize their applications.
Yeah. Customers. I'm sorry, man. Just
Can't
kidding.
live
Just
with
kidding.
them. Can't live without them.
So, Matt, what besides being in Microsoft, what else do you do? Is there something that you want to share with us? Special hobbies, like for instance? I don't know.
A lot of my special hobbies, I do on size a lot of woodworking and making type activities. Back there behind the door, I had a few 3D printers and some vinyl cutters. But also on the side, I give back to the community and focus on user groups. I run the Salt Lake Azure user group here in Utah, and we're actually coming up on our 5th year anniversary.
Whoa,
With co-founder
congrats.
Troy Filler up. So it's been a fun journey for sure. A
Five
lot of lessons learned.
5 years. That's a lot for a user
5
group.
years, yeah.
I know because we've been running ours 10 years, so it's
All
over
right.
10 years even. Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's good to have a community feeling, right?
It's great. That's how my career grew, is through the community and continual
Yeah.
education through that medium. And so I just kind of wanted to give back, and we wanted to help those looking for those questions.
Nice. So on the topic of Azure, since it's an Azure user group, what are you going to talk to us about today?
Today we have a certain new Azure resource that just a G8 here at MS Build called Azure Deployment Environments,
Hmm.
or what I kind of like to talk about is the developer landing zone.
Okay.
My journey into the cloud has really been focused from a software engineer's perspective. From doing that on-premise shift to going into the cloud, thinking about the applications, how to host applications,
Hmm.
and how to increase that deployment. We think about that developer velocity a lot. And that cloud journey, for a lot of people starts as kind of a solo act, and then eventually you have multiple teams that are working together. And so your cadences, that kind of CI/CD DevOps standard changes and ebbs and flows as you grow. And then we have large enterprise corporations that are located all around the world trying to work together in the centralized in the cloud. And so those processes to modernize applications can be complicated at times.
Yes.
And so as this resource came out called the Azure Deployment Environments, that helps give us a kind of prescriptive approach for the developers to build out these applications and these infrastructures. And what's great about this process too is it allows the developers to work along those that are managing the infrastructure or IT. A lot of times I've seen where you put a request in for resources, even if you're using PaaS offerings, such as Azure Functions and App Services. It goes to an IT company to have them build out, and there's like up to a 6-week lead time I've seen before you get those functions and app services back to start programming to.
Yeah.
And so, we try to figure out how to remove that complexity. How do we streamline that a little bit? But again, work together as both teams to have that velocity there and have that frictionless environment. And so, from a developer standpoint, we've worked with something we call infrastructure as code, or IAC for short. ARM templates is kind of the native for Azure, as well as Bicep is kind of the next iteration of that, as well as Terraform. And so as a developer, we kind of get into that programmatic perspective of building out the infrastructure through these files that we can store in our code repositories, and we can build out our applications and resources as need be. But from an IT perspective, from a networking perspective, there's still some insecurity there, and it's still hard to manage it. So there's still some friction that comes along with that. And there's a lot of administration aspects to managing a random code repository with infrastructure as code files, and making sure that everything plays nicely. And so the Azure deployment environment, or the developer landing zone, encapsulates all of these types of processes together to be managed and to work together. And so we have what we call the enterprise landing zone. You might be aware of this, something we at Microsoft.
Yeah, Cloud Adoption Framework. Yep.
Yep. And here we work with clients, and we come out and we design where the virtual networks are going to be sitting, who's the Azure Active Directory administrators, how are we going to manage connectivity and everything. And you can see here, as we look more from a developer's lens and a developer's perspective here, we have us we are out there in kind of left field. We have some DevOps there with some GitHub repositories, and then we have a few applications. And so from this perspective, not a lot of focus and emphasis put on what is there for the developer and how do we make sure they keep moving and iterating on their code and still be within the confines of this enterprise landing zone.
Yeah, because this is really like ops and infra focused, and the developer really feels left out, right? It's and way too complex for most of them. Yeah.
Yep, and a lot of times that networking and infra perspectives don't know how to best optimize for the developers in the development side of the house. And so I think there's this inherent friction that's not necessarily created on purpose, but is just there from the essence of how we work together and trying to figure out what's the best solution. And so we've been working on a process, like I said, we call the developer landing zone. So we take that little subset that we saw, and we are going to expand upon it and build upon the processes that we have. And a lot of this is managed from an Azure resource. When you think, okay, what am I going to build in Azure? Really comes around through a resource called the Dev Center. The Dev Center is going to encapsulate as kind of your control center to connect into those resources that were already built in the enterprise landing zone. It's also going to coordinate with the infrastructure as code files that the developers potentially already created, or those that manage infrastructure in that realm have created, and then marries them together into what we call environments and projects, to where we can now reproduce environments for a project endless amount of time. So if we want to build out a POC feature for a project, and we just need that scaffold out to that infrastructure, it's just a few clicks away. Or we can even bring it into our CI/CD and have it automatically generate this whole infrastructure that is encapsulated and under the umbrella of our enterprise landing zone. So we know that the RBAC permissions, the role-based access control for users, are in place. We know that cost management's in place using Azure tags and utilizing that, as well as cleanup. I don't know about you, Mike, but I've had a lot of times where I've had orphaned resources sitting in Azure, and that kind of it leaks to a cost, right? Especially if you're a pay-as-you-go type user. It's nothing like getting a big bill 30 days later going, oh, I forgot to turn off that expensive, premium SKU resource.
Been there.
It
happens,
We all, I've been there as well. And that's what happens when you kind of go through what I call a click ops through the Azure portal. I think everyone, as you get into the cloud, starts with that clicking through the portal, manually, building out resources by hand, and getting familiar with the environment and that landscape. So it's inevitable. We're humans, we make mistakes. But now we're starting to come with a prescriptive approach where we're like, let's auto-generate these environments, but also let's destroy and take down these environments by just saying, hey, I'm done with this feature. Let's delete it.
Nice. So quick question. The Dev Center that we're seeing, is it the same Dev Center where we have DevBox landed in?
Yes. DevBox and Dev Center play together. And that's the nice thing about this is the Azure Deployment Environment resource, I feel, meets the needs for your different type of development departments. So if you have in-house developers where you have a computer, your development machine, and it's already supplied by the companies, you can utilize just the environment aspect of the Azure deployment environments. If you have contract workers or offshore developers, and you have to deal with that, endpoint device management and a lot of that security, you can also introduce dev boxes into these environments and utilize a dev box that then connects to that environment to do your development. And then that's all managed under that enterprise landing zone and what we've built out initially.
Okay, cool. Just making sure that I understood correctly. That's nice.
Yeah.
All right. So, and this is like a standard bicep of ARM template that we have, and that you can deploy. That's out of the box
Yeah.
somewhere available, or how does it work?
Yep. Yeah. So how that works is, again, we're building upon things that we already utilize. So if we come over into the browser here, I'm going to come into one of my repositories here in GitHub that I utilize for infrastructure as code deployments for my own personal projects that I have fun with. And within my GitHub actions, you can kind of see here, I have this main deployments folder. I have a full function deployment. And when you deploy a function, you kind of want a storage account, application insights, the function itself, and the service plan that's going to utilize it. And then within that, I have that IAC that's going to either build out resources, or it's going to grab an existing resource and then, build those, take those Lego blocks, build them together and say, hey, here's my Azure function, go deploy this and execute this. Which is great, right? It takes away that ClickBox perspective. It takes away the human out of the process. So hopefully it leads to more automation, which leads to fewer errors, but also leads to quickness in that application deployment and a process of how to do it. But again, this is just some developers building things out. So what happens though from the IT side, they don't want me to use this storage account in this region, or they don't want me to access these certain key vaults or system identities. And so we can work together. Now I'm going to jump to another GitHub repository that kind of runs the catalogs from the Dev Center. And we work together in this process of these projects. So I have this programs folder. And in that programs folder, I am going to have various projects going on. You might have noticed from the MS Build keynote with Amanda Silver and Shane Boyer, they did a .NET podcast demo of Azure deployment environments. And so we've been slowly building these out where there's a web component to it. There's a front-end Blazor component to it. There's some containers in the services layer of the whole overarching project. And we can kind of break these sections down and manage these projects, or what we call catalogs, into their bytes. And what this catalog contains is really a manifest file, which is going to describe what this project is, as well as any parameters that are going to go with, are necessary for your IAC files to deploy, because we don't want to hard code everything, as well as the specific ARM template that's going to be deployed here. So if I come into this this JSON file here, you're going to see standard JSON ARM template type content here. So again, I'm not learning anything new as a developer. I'm using my infrastructure as code knowledge that I already currently have, but now I'm kind of refining it and enriching that process a bit. Now, currently, Azure deployment environments did just become generally available, but also Terraform support is coming quickly down the roadmap. So instead of using this ugly JSON ARM template that we all love to hate, you can utilize your ARM templates, or your Terraform templates, as well as your Bicep templates as we get to that point. But so at this point here, you can see we have these multiple projects here. That has our infrastructure as code that's managed and approved. Again, we can work with IT and approve how we're going to combine these together. And then now let's jump over into the portal, into that Dev Center, and kind of talk about how those are utilized. So I just kind of created a resource group I call the developer landing zone, where all my administration type resources sit for these projects, just so it's easy for me to manage myself. But the key resource you're going to see here is the Dev Center. This Dev Center is connected to a Key Vault, which is great because you're going to store your personal access token to GitHub or Azure DevOps, and then utilize that secret in that Key Vault to access those catalog files. Okay. And I think another big important aspect of this too is you're going to see this virtual network as well as this network connection. Yeah. Now, we talked about the enterprise landing zone and building out all this networking and this infra standards for how this company is going to run. But now we're going to build out these resources in the approved virtual network. So if you want to build out resources that sit behind, have no public access and sit in that private network, we can. And we can say, hey, I want to utilize this VNet as well as this network connection when I build out the dev box or when I build out those environments. And so again, it's already closed. We don't have any, oops, I forgot to turn that off as I was creating it. We've all been there.
Yes.
as well as I'm building out infrastructure's code. I thought I was approved, but new standards changed, and I executed this anyway. So now we have this vulnerability within our cloud stance. And so again, refines those guardrails, refines maybe some of those Azure policies you may have in place to give those developers an easier, straight shot to their application modernization journey. So that's kind of a key part where I think the developer landing zone really plays an important part. Because as a developer myself, I don't necessarily want to worry about infrastructure. I don't want to worry about storage. I want to write code, and personally, C# code. And I want to deploy app services and talk to the service bus and event hub and start doing things and making, because that's what brings the
joy,
value to your business. Yeah, enjoy, right? And the value to the business is your proprietary application. So I want to work on that. And if I'm hiring a bunch of developers, I want them to focus on what brings the company value, not necessarily all the plumbing behind it.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So we come into this dev center. So let's kind of click in here, and I'll show you a little bit of how the working components of this. So we talked about catalogs. Now these catalogs is what we connect to for that infrastructure's code files. So right now you're kind of seeing one main entry here, and I'm going to show you kind of how we create those here. It's connected to that dev center that we discussed, which are going to have those 5 projects that I showed for that podcast. We just specify the folder, and then of course the secret, which contains the personal access token to connect to my GitHub repository. And this is stored in that key vault that I created for the developer landing zone.
So do you have to create this yourself, or does the dev center do that for you when you create a catalog?
You have to create it yourself. So you kind of connecting all those parts together. And honestly, going through this process, our documentation on it and the Microsoft Docs are fantastic right now. And since it did just GA, some of the intricate details of certain issues and errors you're going to hit are not yet documented. So as you're diving in, this is a great time to bring to that community and expand and enrich that community as well as you're starting to hit those headaches. I've hit
open those issues on GitHub.
Yep. I've handed a few just building out some demos. You're like, I don't even know. I get an error, and it doesn't tell me any information about the error. It just says, hey, it aired out, which you'll see here in a bit. So I have to reach out to the program group and go, hey, what is this? And they're like, oh yeah, let's open the back door here and look under the rug and let's see your errors. Because it is a brand new resource, right? It's something that I think is going to revolutionize how we deploy and how we build modern applications in the cloud.
True.
But so through those manifest files that we showed in these projects, I'll come back here to our dev center here. Each of my projects in these folders has this manifest file. And that's what the catalog syncing is looking for to give us the information and know what I need to do to build out an environment here. So that manifest file is very important. And so we come in, you can sync it and it'll update. So as I'm updating the IAC files and I commit, you do a PR into our repositories, we can come in here and sync this. All of these interaction as well can be done through a CI/CD process. But for the sake of a demonstration, it's always great to just kind of click ops through here to really understand what's happening. But everything I'm doing in the portal, you can do automated through your CI/CD pipelines. Yeah, which is great. When you think about feature branching, if you have a project, so let's just say the website of this podcast app, and we want to add a new feature, and I branch off of our main branch into, say, a live streaming feature. Well, we can have CI/CD that once I create that new feature branch to go and execute and build out one of these environments utilizing the approved catalog for that feature. And so now I have the Azure infrastructure automatically built out upon building that feature branch. I clone that repository to my machine. I start programming or running code, commit to that branch, and then have a deployment to deploy to that new infrastructure. And I can start testing it as it is using the Azure Load Tester or Playwright. And so again, it's automating and it's just bringing in that velocity for me to really test what's happening. You're not getting any more of those, well, it worked on my machine, I don't know why it doesn't work on your type scenarios, Okay.
But we have containers for that.
Yeah. And so, and that's part of, like, we can containerize this, we can deploy it. So as you're used to, Mike, deploying your containers to your Azure Container Registry and then deploying that to your Azure Container Apps or AKS, we can still utilize that in this process.
But
So that's kind
the
of,
streamline the process. I get it. Yeah, there's
yeah.
value there. Yeah.
Yeah, and what I think a key term too to think about is this is a prescriptive approach to making sure everyone, it's the trailhead for that journey, to making sure all our developers know how to do this. Because I've been in situations where clients decide we're going to go Azure, but it's always the higher ups that make that decision, and then the developers like, I've never been in Azure ever. I've never programmed to the cloud. Where do I even start? And it's nothing like having a few, 100 developers going, I don't know where to go. And so now we can create this road and really say, hey, this is where we start hiking down this trail to achieve this modernization goal. Start with the Azure development environment, the developer landing zone. That's kind of where I love that coin of that term, is this is where we all start. And then the developers just start doing what they know to do and writing that proprietary product. So to build upon, so we talked about how to get to that infrastructure as code setup and those catalogs. We can now come down into our projects. And these projects is kind of where we start meshing a lot of these things together. You can see here I have a few already created, but let's go ahead and just kind of create a new one to show you what that looks like. So these projects here, we can come up and select our dev center that we're going to be building this against to, and of course its name. And so we'll come in and we'll pick our dev center and we'll say Unsung Heroes. Come in and bring that in. And then, we can add our tags. And what's great about that is we add these tags that cascades to all of these resources that are being built. So again, think of that cost management or that reporting of chargebacks for the cloud, or trying to understand why certain resources are in the cloud from a different perspective. You're getting just random reports of your Azure resources saying, hey, your monthly bill is this, but you have no idea what's going on. Now we can still manage that cost. We're not going to have runaway charges or unexpected resources sitting in the cloud.
So it's like a policy that you're going to set to where you just force a tagging on it, and it will it will show up in the reporting, which is really handy. Yeah,
it's super handy. And again, you're taking more broader strokes to bring in that management instead of saying, hey, I'm going to go into every resource. I'm going to add this tag, or oops, I forgot to add the tag, and so I need to go back through and clean my stuff up. But then that builds, that starts your project. So as that's building, we'll kind of do some TV magic here. We'll come back to our dev center and go to a different project.
TV magic, yeah, Martha Stewart time.
Yeah, bring out the it's right here. One thing I knew from a naming convention, as I've noticed as I work through here, is I always kind of prefix these things with project dash whatever my project may be, because these projects will show up in your resources, in your resource group. So if I come back to my resource group in my landing zone, you're going to see these various project types. And so there's that clean demo. And as I come down, now you're seeing podcasts and the project. So my own OCD, I like that prefix here. So then all my projects are sitting together and anytime I need to actually come into that portal. That's one thing I picked up as going through the demo. Otherwise, you're going to have projects scattered all over your resources and your resource group going, what is this? So
true. Remind yourself, have a session on naming conventions.
Exactly. So now you're seeing that Unsung project that we just created. Now, once we're in the project, what's great here is we can come in and we build access controls to this. And we can bring in those RBAC permissions so that those that have proper access can create the projects or the environments for this project. We come in, we have multiple types. We can set up environment types. Let me go back to the project. And these environment types are very similar to the environments you would see in, say, GitHub Actions, where you have your prod, your dev, and a certain, variables are being used and certain flows are being executed. This is the same thing. If you want to interact with your CI/CD with the Azure deployment environment, you can match these environment types with your environments in GitHub and auto deploy and connect into those different environments as you're promoting your code from dev to production. And so we can come in and create a development environment type. I can also come in and create, I only have 2 in my machine here, but we're going to add a testing environment to this project. And you can see here also now we're starting to deal with who has permissions for this project in this testing environment. So in testing, we don't necessarily want our developers to have access to change things because, it's going to be testing. It's going to be QA. So you can easily come in and say, hey, I want to come into my developer. and just say, hey, I'm going to give them, think of as a group, reader access, just so they can help debug what's going on and see what's happening. But then you can have a test group and say, hey, this test group is going to be contributors, or those that create the environment, what permissions they can have. So that way your testers could create the test version of your project, and then they can have all control of what they need to do, while the developers have all the control they need in their dev environment. And so you're setting these up here that then cascade to anytime I build out more versions of this project. You think by features, all that setup is already done for you. You don't have to reset that up. I don't have to re-add tags and re-add RBAC permissions and re-add all of those nasty, boring things to make sure we're secure, make sure, because cybersecurity is convenient, said no one ever. And so
I do, but yeah, that's a different story.
And so this helps us, helps us set those things up to make sure, again, as a developer too, I don't shoot myself in the foot. And,
Yes.
again, you don't want to open up a vulnerability on accident, which is usually how those vulnerabilities are introduced into our ecosystems.
Indeed.
And so we can come in and create those RBAC permissions. And then, so what does that do then? So now we conceptually think about, these setups. But now let's think about how we're going to act into this. So I'm going to go into another portal. That's another interesting aspect too of Azure deployment environments. We're going to go into a portal. It's called, just sign me out, devportal.microsoft.com, and log in as my system admin. Just signed me out, so that's Joyce.
I see you have the same problem as I do.
Yeah. There's a fantastic domain there.
Yeah, exactly. But it's secure though.
It is secure. And so my system admin here, Ted, has some access to some of these projects and environments. And so we can come down, and what this is kind of the nice ClickOps side of it is I can come in and say, hey, I need to create a new environment for that feature that we're going to start this next sprint. And, we're going to create that branch in GitHub or in Azure DevOps. And so let's get to that communal environment built out so we can start deploying to it. So you can come in, create your new environment, give it its name, because, we're good naming conventions here. And then you can pick your projects here. So you can kind of see your hub and the web are two aspects to these projects that we talked about in those catalogs. And then from there, I can say, hey, I want to deploy a development environment version of this or a testing environment version of that project. And then again, once those resources are all built out and what I want to deploy, then those RBAC permissions are set in. So then I come in and I say, hey, I want to build, the hub application here. And what's great is we talked about the parameters there in the infrastructure's code. So those that don't have parameters, you'll see here, they'll be a little streamlined of just next, which is a create type thing. But as we come into more parameters here and utilize it, I did that backwards. You'll see here. So my web app does not have parameters. You're seeing just the create option.
Yeah.
But then when your IAC does have parameters, you can come into next and then start putting in those parameters for you. So it kind of gives you that GUI.
So it starts reading JSON or the bicep, recognizing the parameters of JSON file, I think.
A little bit, yeah. It's a connection with our manifest files.
Yeah.
And our manifest file will have those parameters here that are defined for that deployment. And then, it gives it to that JSON file, to that ARM template to run.
Okay, cool.
So you come through, you create that environment. And again, since we're in the secure Microsoft field team environment, you can see here, I get a few, build errors as this builds out because of certain restrictions we have. But what you're seeing here is, multiple environments I have built out at different projects. So here's my hub project. Here's my web project. This is a deployment version of those. And what that will build out for us, if you bear with me here, we'll come back to my subscription. We go to our resource groups. You will see what it'll do is it'll build out a resource group just for that environment here. So all the resources necessary for that environment will be built out here. And then I can start deploying to it and start coding.
Okay, cool. So it deploys really everything in there. Only the name is kind of
that's a different one. Yeah, and some prefixes. This is the clean demo version that I run. But what's great about this process is as we've gone through, this has all been very much manual ClickOps. right?
Yeah.
We've clicked through the portal. All of these can be connected into your CI/CD pipeline. And so if you want to build out, so now say that feature branch we created, once we create that branch, it creates out this infrastructure, and we say, hey, we're done with the sprint. It's time to PR back to main. We create that pull request. We approve that pull request. And then upon that approval, we can say, hey, go delete that environment. We don't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And so then it's like doing a Terraform destroy command. It's just going to remove all that infrastructure out of the way. Cost is taken care of. Any security vulnerabilities are taken care of because it's all removed. As well as if you're in the portal, you can come in here and delete your environment if you'd like manually, as well as if you have to make changes. So again, we added a feature. So maybe I needed to add a few more functions of that new feature. We update that infrastructure's code, we commit it to that repository, and then we say, hey, let's redeploy that environment. And we can redeploy, and it'll update that infrastructure as we all are accustomed to utilizing infrastructure's code.
So for the CI/CD part, is there actions already available for this, or is there tasks available for this in Azure DevOps?
Yeah, there are some docs. If you go to the Microsoft docs we have, a lot of it is through the Azure CLI. We can create those and make those calls in our CI/CD pipeline. And we're seeing an uptick in people creating their samples of how they're going to build the CI/CD. And so you kind of fork their repository, make the changes you need to make, and then add the cherry on top and then deploy it.
Okay, cool. So they're just doing AZ, and what is it then? Dev for?
Yeah, Dev Center
Dev
is
Center,
the command.
right.
Yeah, I have a few of those. Like we can come in these CLI commands. So Dev Center, Dev, and we're seeing like my environment, my list here. We can see our catalogs. You can see what kind of dev centers you have because you can have multiple dev centers depending on how you want to organize your development.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we can see our catalog items, we can see our environments. And so, yeah,
that's good that it's all, yeah.
Go ahead.
It's good that it's all exposed to the graph. Also, I see that was one of our first editions that we did of Azure Unsung Heroes. This is something really underutilized, and I'm good to see that the first thing that you have is an Azure Graph Grid, which is nice.
Yeah,
good one.
Yeah. I use this README for my notepad copies where I need to read, send it, all these commands to the command line, and I'm tired of retyping.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense. It's like building your own blog post from a couple of years ago. How the hell did you do that again? And what was that thing? Start Googling. First thing. Oh my God, my blog post. There you have it.
Yeah,
it's like the command. Yourself, right?
The command to make RBAC permissions. I had to, I bookmarked that snippet because I use it all the time and I never remember it. So just copy paste.
Cool. That looks really useful. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, and I think a big proponent to this system as well is there's no added cost to utilizing the Dev Center. The cost is going to be your utilization of DevBox. The cost is going to be the utilization of the infrastructure that your environments build out. But that's it. This really is a mechanism, an umbrella, again, to create that developer landing zone, to bring that developer velocity and to remove the friction of all that plumbing, to just get going, to be like, I want to deploy this fun web app idea we had, the spontaneous feature we wanted to bring into a project. Let's build it out real quick. It's not like, hey, let's wait the lead time of 6 weeks to make sure we get some infrastructure back, approved for us so we can deploy. And by then, the three of us are going, what was it again we wanted to build out?
Yes.
Or, we were buried by a bunch of tech debt between now and then, and we'll never get to it. So that's where I see the value of this.
Yeah, I see the value there too, especially with the deletion part. I think I even will experiment with something else that I figured out last week, which is called the cost CLI. Some guy built this in the community. I don't know whether you saw that on LinkedIn, but if you combine this thing together with that thing and we just report back the cost of the full run of a test environment, this is great stuff. I mean, you can do really cool stuff there. That's nice. Yeah. So the flow is really, really good. I like this. I really do.
Yep. And just to show here, like I said, we can go both routes, right? You can go manually or we can automate that. And so I wanted to save the special CI/CD for a later time, or have you guys have me back on the show, and then we can go through the.
Oh yeah, I've already made a note. That's the next demo.
Is that a shameless plug there? Oh man,
just tried, job security. But and then finally, just to kind of come back full circle where we started here, we talked about the architecture here and what was being built out. So hopefully this architecture makes a little more sense now that we've discussed the catalogs, working with an infrastructure code, building out our environments that are encompassed by our network and our back permissions. And so now if we remodify that landing zone that the Cloud Adoption Framework utilizes, and we bring them in as a first-class citizen, you can see here how we have expanded that one little space of DevOps into a whole section for the developers to have their area to bring their knowledge and skills to the value of the business.
How it
And now
should be.
Yeah. Developers are the ones that cause a riot and make change.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they play an important part in the entire DevOps organization.
Yeah.
Not forget, it's a solution development lifecycle. It's not software development lifecycle anymore, and this is really important. So that's cool. And I love the new drawing of this thing. So this is official, right? Or did you just
not unofficial? This has been Bryan thinks this is how it needs to sit and work. I'm working with the Cloud Adoption Framework team as we trying to refine what this is. And make it more official. We referenced the documentation already pointing to the Azure deployment environment. So it's starting to be intertwined into the threads of that deployment there. But like I said, I think it's a huge play for the developer landing zone because it helps reduce that natural friction that's put into place between IT and developers. And I think that friction is completely unintentional. It's just how we envision and how we see our perspective of what is involved to make a product. And so why not make it easy for everyone, and embrace that. And so lean into this a little bit.
Okay. Well, that was a cool way of looking at developers in a different way, making it easier for us to deploy stuff, to destroy stuff, and also
making you more dangerous, Mike.
Making me even more dangerous. Shh, don't tell that to my manager. So,
just hit the delete button when you're done. No one will know.
Yeah. That's always the thing. But unfortunately, my delete button doesn't work that well, apparently, for some reason. I always keep breaking the bank for some reason. No, just kidding. All jokes aside. No, that was really nice of you, Bryan. It was a really good segue into the things that are making our future as a developer a little bit more nice to live in, specifically in the DevOps life sphere, DevOps organization. So thank you for that. Thank you for those insights. And with that, I would say maybe we will have you on another show. Yeah, I saw that Matt was already taking notes. So
I get paid by the years. I get paid by the year, so whenever you need me.
All right. Good luck with your user group in the near future. Celebrate the 5th anniversary. And I think on that, we will have that ending with a bombshell. See you in the next episode, probably within 14 days. And everybody have fun and take care. Bye-bye, friends of Azure Unsung Heroes. Bye-bye.
Take care.